Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MCU Perspective, Sony Edition. And today we're going to be discussing the third film to be released as part of Sony's universe of Marvel characters, aka the Spider-Man superhero universe, Morbius. And since this is the character's first solo film, I should probably talk about my history with him prior to seeing this movie. My first exposure to the character of Morbius was actually through the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. While I was too young, or probably wasn't even born, when the show came out, I did see reruns on television, and I did see the version of Morbius that appeared in that show, and put simply, it didn't really grab me. They censored him for the show as while he typically did act like a traditional vampire in some sense in the show, they gave him all the vampire abilities, but instead of having him drink blood, they had it be that he had these weird things on his hands that instead sucked plasma out of people by touching them, which I think is creepy, but not in the way that they wanted it to be. It didn't really grab me, no pun intended, and it just kind of felt weird, especially considering that they tried to make his origin as like a cross between, like, essentially be tied to Spider-Man, and how he took a sample of Peter's DNA and then used it to mix it with a bat and so forth. So it really didn't grab me, and when that was your first exposure to a character like that, you're not really interested in looking more into them, and unfortunately that was the case with Morbius for me. A lot of what he did not actually he didn't grab me. And while I was aware that he was a character in the comics, again, based on that interpretation I saw in the show, I wasn't really invested in learning more about him. But that being said, though, when I did hear that they were planning to make a movie for him for Sony's universe of Marvel characters, I still wasn't really that interested. Again, that night the original interpretation really didn't leave a good taste in my mouth, so it didn't really look so I wasn't really that excited when I learned that they were going to make a movie based on the character. And while I had learned more about and while I had heard some more stuff about the character through the comics, again, it didn't grab me. Then I saw the trailer for the movie. Needless to say, I was honestly a little interested after that. It looked like a really damn good trailer. Very gothic, very action-packed, with mystery, with maybe a bit of horror thrown in. It looked legitimately interesting, and I honestly thought this actually looks pretty cool. I'd be looking forward to seeing it. And not only that, the trailer also had a little extra something in there that finally convinced me, okay, these films are connected to the MCU, which in turn started these vlogs and got me to start doing this little sub-series. As such, I legitimately was looking forward to seeing the movie when it was supposed to come out. I thought, okay, maybe this will be good. Maybe it'll jumpstart its own universe. Then COVID happened. And as a result, this film and several others wound up getting delayed. Now, while some were delayed for maybe 1 year, this film got delayed quite a few times. While the other Marvel films got eventual release dates and that were essentially just the same as their original release, but just a year later, this one kept getting jumped around. And to be fair, the other films did too. Black Widow got moved from a summer showing to a late fall, and then summer the next year. The same went with Eternals kind of got a similar treatment before it got essentially turned into the film until it got pushed back so that it was 2 films after Black Widow instead of being immediately after like was the intended plan. But unfortunately, Morbius just kept getting bounced around. At one point, it was supposed to come out in like January of earlier this year, but then again, that got pushed back again to earlier this month at the time that I'm recording this. So people weren't really that hyped when the film was eventually going to come out. So it's not helped by the fact that people were speculating that the reason they moved it from January to April was because Spider-Man No Way Home had just come out, and considering all the goodwill that Sony had built up at that point, they probably were afraid to lose that goodwill should this film come out. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. Dog came in a little while ago, and while I was talking, so I had to close the door after he left. Anyway, so yeah, people were very skeptical of this movie when it came time to come out. The hype had died down, and the whole connection that they were originally going to establish, it was called into question, especially considering what No Way Home revealed about the whole connection between the Sony films and the larger MCU. So, needless to say, people were a little skeptical, and sure enough, when the film came out, the critical reviews were not that great for it. It was just bashed and did not perform, and from what I've heard, did not perform. It was not performing as well as was hoped. It's even been beaten by Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which I also have seen. It's a good movie, and yeah, and for me, when I heard this, I was like trying to hold out hope. I thought, even if a lot of these people don't like the movie, but you know what? I'm gonna hope. There are certain films that a lot of other people don't like, and I found myself enjoying. So maybe I'll still enjoy it. Maybe they're all just brushing it off. Maybe there's something in there that I think will genuinely grab me. Maybe think this is a good movie. That was not the case. The first time I saw it, I honestly did not care for it. While there were elements in there that I thought were good, I thought it was ultimately a stinker, which I did not like saying. As such, when it came time to do this vlog, I thought it was just going to be more of the same. It was just going to be like me complaining about all these things in the movie that didn't work. But, oddly enough, the second time around, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I mean, it wasn't good, but I noticed more things in there that that drew me more into the movie, and I don't think it was, and I honestly am glad for that. But would I still recommend the movie to you? Well, let's get to the long-ass plot summary first. And fair warning, I'm going to be spoiling this movie rotten. I'm going to be talking about every major plot element that I can remember, and that's essentially the whole movie. So, if you haven't seen this film yet and plan to and don't want to go in spoiled, turn away now, because there's no going back. I'm not gonna hold a single plot element back. It's just gonna be beat, 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 beat. Everything's gonna go forward. So again, you've been warned. If you haven't seen it yet, turn away now. If you haven't, I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay, plot summary. So, our main character for this movie, as the title implies, is a man by the name of Dr. Michael Morbius, played by Jared Leto. Morbius has essentially a rare blood disease that, put simply, leaves him in a very weakened state. He can barely move around on his own. His bones are brittle. If he does walk around, he has to do so with walkers. He has to have his blood. He has to constantly have blood transfusions in order to keep himself going. And but even then, it's made clear that he's not gonna live to be that the fact that he's lived as long as he has is a friggin' miracle. And as a result, yeah, he's desperate to find a cure. Something that he has spent a good chunk of his career doing. It turns out he may have found one. You see, as an adult, he is a profound medical professional, and one of his greatest achievements is developing artificial blood, which I'm guessing helps with the transfusions. But in studying blood, I'm guessing he has begun studying the genetics and metabolisms of vampire bats, who subsist on drinking blood. And in his studies, he found that they release a coagulant that when they drink blood winds up. Hold on, I gotta look it up. I know I wrote it down. Sorry, I did take notes on this, so I'm gonna occasionally refer back to this. Oh yeah, they produce an anticoagulant that essentially makes the blood safe for, consumption. And so what Morbius wants to do is that he wants to create a serum that will infuse vampire bat DNA into his own, so that his body will naturally create that enzyme and counteract the harmful effects of his blood disease. Of course, and he's not alone in this. And in his studies, he's working alongside a woman named, where is it? There it is. Dr. Martine Bancroft, who they imply they have a romantic relationship with, but it's not really well defined. I'll get into that after the plot summary. But needless to say, she becomes aware of his experiments, especially considering that he's got a giant menagerie of vampire bats that he got from the savannah. And so but because she cares about Morbius, but because she cares about Michael and his studies, she helps him out with his experiments. And while they do seem to hit a few failures, well, they do seemingly hit a failure once. Eventually, they do create the serum, and so Michael decides that he wants to keep testing it, but he's pretty sure that if tested on humans, it will work. Though even he admits that it's going to be a little costly, and it's probably very illegal, very unethical, and they need to be careful with it. So, if he wants to get to human trials, he's gonna need to find a few loopholes, which is where his benefactor comes in. You see, Michael's benefactor is a childhood friend of his by the name of Lucien, or as he calls him, Milo. I'm going to keep calling him Lucien because that's his real name, and that makes for a good villain name. Yeah, spoilers, Lucien becomes the villain later on. And best part, he's played by Matt Smith, and I'm just gonna say this right now. Matt Smith is amazing in this role as Lucien. He hits all the marks perfectly. He plays it up like a child. He plays it up like an angry child, but who's clearly holding some kind of darkness back. And he can be threatening when he can be so threatening yet charming. He looks like he's having a ball in the role. It's just evil and loving it. He's just one of the best things in the movie, and Matt Smith was perfectly cast for the role, so kudos on them for that. But as pretty much, like I said, he's Michael Morbius' benefactor, and I'll give credit where it's due. While the opening scene in the movie didn't really do much to showcase their friendship, as one of the first scenes in the movie was a flashback to when they were kids, and I get what they were trying to go with, like they have a deep connection, but it wasn't really that well defined. In this case, in the first scene we see them as adults, they do actually have some good chemistry, joke and jab at each other, and clearly are old buddies. But essentially the reason Morbius is even seeing him now is because, like I said, he's the benefactor, and he wants Lucien to fund his expedition out to fund his little experiment. In this case, he wants him to get him a tanker so they can go out in international waters and test this, since of course there's no jurisdiction out there. As such, Lucien happily gives him the money he needs to continue this experiment because unfortunately Lucien has the same disease that Michael is, and it's clear that he's not doing well either. He's very well off, obviously, which they state is because he's a good gambler, but he's not. But his physical health is still sucking, as even to this day he's still getting blood transfusions. He's in a lot of pain, and the caretaker that Michael and Lucien had when they were kids, when they were at this home for children like them, he's still caring for Lucien even to this day. So he's not doing well. So he's got a very big investment in what Michael's doing beyond their being friends. But anyway, like I said, he gets the funding, and the next scene we see is Michael and Martine on a tanker in the middle of international waters, and we see that Michael has continued his experiments and is now ready to test it out on humans, with himself, of course, being the first test subject because of his blood disease. As such, he gets the serum all ready, and Martine brings him into this other room for safety purposes, and she injects him with the serum. And so before it can take effect, she straps him down and leaves him alone for a bit. And then it's clear that something begins happening, as we see him shaking, his eyes turning red, and he seems to calm down for a second, but then something odd happens. You see, at this point, the ship's captain goes in to check on them, and while he begins bad-mouthing Martine, the machines that are supposed to be monitoring Michael's vitals suddenly go dead. And when Martine and the captain look inside the room, Michael's gone. They both go in to investigate and see what's going on, and they see the good doctor clinging to the ceiling. And when Dr. Bancroft gets a look at his face, it ain't human. As we see his nose has become bigger, resembling a bat. His eyes his ears are pointy. His mouth is filled with fangs. His skin looks a bit more rigged, or I don't know how to describe it. I'm not good at this stuff when it comes to the moment. It just looks unnatural. His hair is now more let down and shaggy. Yeah, it's clear that something's happened to Michael. And as a result, once the captain sees him, he begins freaking out. And when Michael drops to the floor, the captain makes the dumb decision of opening fire on him, which results in Michael leaping at the guy and killing him. Martine immediately realizes, oh shit, he's gone rabid, and immediately runs out of the room and locks it, but Michael is still freaking out as he begins at super speed just banging against the walls of his cell and starts banging against the glass wall as Martine just keeps desperately trying to reason with him. Unfortunately, at this point, the crew of the tanker comes because the captain called for backup before he was killed, and when they see Michael bashing his way in the cell, they immediately think, oh shit, this guy's a threat, and get their guns ready. While Martine tries to stop them, their response is to knock her into some machines, which in turn knocks her out. And thus, when Michael ends up breaking out of the cell, he falls to the ground, sees what they did to Dr. Martine, and he proceeds to paint the walls with their blood. Not figuratively, but it's honestly a very kick-ass opening for Morbius in his vampire state, because oh my god, it's so cool. The way he moves around, the super speed, the way he stalks these guys throughout the ship as they realize, oh shit, this guy's gonna kill us. It's really nice. The fast pace, they have little slow-mo shots, so I think emphasize just how fast he is moving. I love the added tension as they keep trying to fight him off, but they're clearly outclassed. It's so friggin' awesome. And I love the final scene. I think with the final scene you see of it is this one guy who's just cornered, he's freaking out, and then suddenly you see Morbius's claws come down, grab him, pull him up, and suddenly he goes to a POV shot as you see him struggling, and Morbius just going for right for his face. It's a badass opening, and I friggin' love it. But of course, after this, we see Morbius now back in his human form and now calmer and more in control. However, he does not seem to remember the freakout, and so when he goes back to his lab and finds the crew dead, he is obviously freaking out, especially when he finds Martine's body. Though he's calm when he realizes she's alive. As such, he checks the CCTV footage of the tanker, and he's obviously perturbed to the point where when he sees it, he begins shaking and vomits because he's just so horrified. But regardless, he realizes that something has happened to him, and at least Dr. Bancroft needs some medical attention. So he ends up calling in an SOS to the mainland as he jumps off the tanker and swims back to shore. In the meantime, the police arrive and they begin examining everything, and they begin realizing that something is clearly up, because while Dr. Bancroft is clearly alive, she is unfortunately in a slight coma. I say slight because she wakes up relatively quickly, but she does need medical attention. But the thing is, considering that she was unconscious, someone called, and there was an SOS call, clearly someone made the call. But everybody here is dead, and based on how long they've been dead, it could not have been any of them that made the call. It's not helped by the fact that the guy who made the call was a man, and yet there's no one else alive but Dr. Bancroft on the ship. So clearly something is up here. Someone is missing. And they don't seem to have any proof and they don't seem to have any evidence to find out who it is because, well, it turns out Morbius wound up wiping the CCTV footage. But he did end up leaving a little bit behind. One of the things they showcase in the movie is that he likes to make little papier-mâché bats and he gives them to people he cares about. Like, he gave one to Lucien when they were kids. He gave one to, I think, a little girl that he was tending to for medical purposes, and he gave one to Dr. Bancroft before he got the serum injection. And unfortunately, the police find it and begin kind of putting pieces together. In the meantime, Morbius goes back to his lab, to his home base lab, Horizon Labs, and we get a quick little montage of him testing out his abilities and weaknesses, which I admit I think is pretty cool and makes sense for the character, but it also feels a little rushed. As it feels like some of these things that we can just see visually, except in this case, it's just a little montage of him testing out the powers and his narration over it, which is supposed to be taking place afterwards. But it's a mixed scene for me, but it's also pretty cool as we get to see him testing out his abilities, but we also do learn something important. He does need to keep drinking blood. It turns out that after he ingests blood, he has a set amount of time where he's at his physical peak and can keep going, But if he stops drinking blood, he starts reverting back to how he was before, feeling physically weak, inept, not able to do anything. So he needs to have a constant supply of blood. Thankfully, he's got a freezer full of packs of blood on standby, and thankfully he's got a good storage of artificial blood as well, which I like is actually blue for whatever reason, but it's enough to save him. Though as he experiments, he knows that eventually artificial blood may not do it, which he doesn't really have a basis for this, though he just kind of formulates that artificial blood will eventually wear off, which is eventually proven true, but kind of a weird assumption based on what we've seen. But it does get the job done for a while. As with artificial blood, he's able to test out his ability. Able to test out his abilities, learn that he can move faster, has almost superhuman levels of strength, a great agility, that he has echolocation. It's all really cool. It's all really cool, but like I said, he also is testing his weaknesses, and so after he hits his limit with the blood. After he hits his limit, he intentionally isolates himself to see what happens to his physical condition, and based on the fact that based on his assumption that the artificial blood will eventually stop working, he knows that eventually he may end up having to drink the red, and he thinks that that's a bad idea considering what happened on the tanker. However, in the throes of his agony, he gets a visitor in the case of Lucien. You see, Lucien wound up seeing a news broadcast about the tanker, and he obviously knows that that's where Morbius went because he funded it. So he decided to go back to the lab, most likely to see if he could find Michael and hope that Michael was okay. And sure enough, he finds Michael in isolation, just looking terrible, and he writes on the walls of his cell in his own blood, which Lucien is able to accommodate as he goes in the freezer and gets him a pack of artificial blood. Lucien sees him heal up and all good, and Lucien's like, "You did it. You found the cure. You got to give it to me, man." But Morbius tells him, "No, this thing is a curse. This is bad. I made a mistake. This is not good. This is not what we've been looking for." However, Lucien is not really willing to listen. As while Morbius keeps telling him, "No, thing is a curse, it's bad," Lucien's like, "No, come on, I need this, man, I need this more than anything. I'm sick of being like this. And it just kind of leads to a little mini argument because Lucien thinks that Morbius is being selfish, or when he says, "I killed those people," it's like, "No, those people were thugs. We can cover that up." And eventually Lucien does back off when Morbius snaps at him and tells him to get out, and he briefly sees his monster form. And for a brief second, we see Lucien look shocked before eventually leaving. Now, at first viewing, I thought that was him being in fear before running away, but after the second viewing, I kind of realized it was awe. We'll get to that later. In the meantime, though, Morbius is feeling obvious guilt for all of this, and now that he's gotten a new dose of blood, he decides that he's going to go visit He's going to go visit Dr. Bancroft in the hospital, since obviously she's not doing well. However, when he goes to visit her, we end up cutting to a nurse that works at the hospital who's there after hours and is just kind of doing her daily grind. However, as she leaves her post, we see her going in a hallway, and a thing with this hallway is that it's got a bunch of overhead lights on standby that are all dark but are motion activated. So when you walk underneath one, they come on. And so as she's walking down the hallway, the lights over her head begin turning on, but so do lights behind her. And when she looks to investigate, she sees something humanoid, but not quite, that seems to climb up the walls and into the rafters. And as she watches, the lights begin turning on, and they're getting closer to her. In fear, she runs for it down the hall as the lights just seem to speed up and getting closer to her, until out of fear and desperation, she turns on all the lights. And for a little bit, she's calm. She feels all right, and she feels fine that nothing's there, until you see a clawed hand grab her by the neck and hold her to the wall. Before you see that whoever the owner of this hand is just start ripping into her throat and start draining her blood. As such, we cut to the next morning as Michael wakes up in Dr. Bancroft's room, and there's a commotion going on outside. When he looks to see, it turns out everyone's found the body of the nurse completely drained of her blood. So yeah, this Michael, with not really much evidence to go on, begins to think that he may have been responsible, that he may have blacked out and drained this innocent woman's blood. Because they ultimately do rationalize that the guys in the tanker were just thugs, just jerks. They were probably guilty of something, so no one's going to miss them, which is a kind of rude assumption, but whatever. But this is an innocent woman. She had a life, she had kids, so yeah, this one isn't exactly going to be brushed under the rug. And as such, Morbius, realizing that he can't stay here, decides he has to kind of run. He has to isolate himself from everybody, lest he kill again. As such, he runs back to his lab and begins just packing whatever he can, but including a few packs of artificial blood, though unfortunately for him, it's still not... Though unfortunately for him, the police are not incompetent, though the characters are annoying. I'll get to that later. Essentially, they've been putting the pieces together and have been little by little realizing that Dr. Michael Morbius is involved with this, because Dr. Bancroft worked for Horizon Labs, which Michael Morbius is employed at. Of course, they realize that he's got a blood transfusion, has been looking for a cure, and considering that Dr. Bancroft was on the tanker, and there was clearly signs that there was an experiment going on there, they begin to think that maybe Michael Morbius might have had a hand in all of this, that he may have been on the ship, and that in his experiments he did something to him, which they're not wrong with. And with Michael super hearing, he's able to overhear that they're locking down the building while the policemen talk to him. And so as the police begin questioning him and try to like grab him so that he can answer more questions, he kind of just drops the whole facade and knocks them aside and tries to make a run for it. Unfortunately, when he gets to the roof, he finds that for some reason that one of his powers seems to be getting caught in a breeze, because he gets nearly knocked off the top of the building, and before he can regain his balance, and by that point, one of the officers has him at gunpoint, so he's just quickly arrested. And while they try to get answers out of him to figure out what exactly happened to him and what exactly his experiment did, he's still not giving them straight answers. So, as a result, they lock him in a cell and charge him for murder, which Michael is honestly okay with, because he knew the nurse, he worked with her many times, he knew her situation, and he didn't want her to die. It's not helped by the fact that he has begun measuring the intervals between when he's had packs of artificial blood, and sure enough, the time has shortened. Originally, he could go 6 hours between packets, now it's 4 hours and 22 minutes. So yeah, he's not exactly doing well. However, while in his cell, he gets an unexpected visitor, in this case, Lucien, who's there claiming to be his lawyer. However, Lucien tells Michael that he believes him, he knows that Michael didn't do it, he's a healer, not a destroyer, there's no way he would have killed that woman. But Michael is, of course, just not really buying it. But Lucien tells him, "Don't worry, we'll get you out of here soon." And then after that, he leaves him a blood pack, telling him to try and help him out. However, the blood pack is red, not blue, and of course, Morbius is a little hesitant to drink it until he notices something. You see, when Lucien entered the prison, he was walking with a cane. When he leaves, he left the cane behind. And as we see him slowly leaving the prison, we see that his posture is actually beginning to improve. Just little by little, as he brings out a flask and says, "I need to drink this," and as he drinks it, he gets a bit more pep in his step, looks a bit more hearty, a bit more healthy. And yep, as I said earlier, Lucien is the villain. It turns out that when Morbius was in the lab, he snuck back in and took the serum, and the reason he killed the nurse was because that was when he first transformed, and I guess he targeted her. As such, Morbius quickly realizes that what Lucien has done, and realizing he's got to catch him, out of desperation, he drinks up the packet of red blood, which gives him the boost that he needs, and he breaks out of prison. As such, he manages to catch up with Lucien after he ends up killing a man selling newspapers, and Lucien is just all cheery and happy, like, "Oh, see, I told you it'd get you out." But Morbius is like, "No, you don't know what you've done to yourself. This is a curse." But again, Lucien is not listening. He thinks this is amazing. He's never felt more alive, and so it results in him and Morbius getting into a fight, and again, it's a really cool fight scene. I know it's again part of the hero fights evil version of themselves type of thing, but it's so cool seeing them go at it with their vampire powers, especially since the battle leads into a subway, and the whole time Lucian is just having a ball. Like, this is just a fun time for him, while Morbius is just desperately trying to overpower him or talk him down, but Lucian isn't listening. And as a result of their actions, they end up getting the attention of the police, and Lucian is just mowing them down happily. He loves having all this power, and the more Morbius tries to reason with him, the less willing he is to listen. To the point where he begins taunting Michael about how they always had death hanging over their heads, so why shouldn't the rest of the world have to do that now? And so, just eventually, Eventually Lucian has Morbius cornered in the subway tunnels, but before they can get the battle going, Morbius is able to use his training to discern when a train is coming up, and with the aforementioned wind thing, he begins piecing together that maybe he can take advantage of this, and so as Lucian goes in for another attack, Michael jumps into the path of a train rather than getting hit by it. He manages to use the updrafts from the train going to actually friggin' fly, which honestly, it looks pretty damn cool. And so with this, he's able to get away from Lucian, but unfortunately Lucian is still out there, and he is determined to get Michael on his side. So yeah, he's willing to keep killing people, especially when the police arrive at the subway station and find the bodies of the dead officers. They're convinced that it was Morbius who did it. As such, realizing that they have to find him, they begin putting a tracker on. They begin keeping track of Dr. Bancroft, who realizes she's being tracked and manages to slip away from the police. But after she does this, Michael manages to meet up with her, and she doesn't believe that he would. And she did not believe for a second that Michael killed the nurse or those officers. And when Michael tells her it's Lucian, he took the serum, I have to find a way to stop him, she's more than willing to help him out. As such, they begin kind of putting they eventually end up getting a makeshift lab that Michael ends up taking from these counterfeiters, which it's kind of feels like a scene that's just there to pad out the movie, but it is kind of cool seeing him be badass as he breaks the hand of the counterfeiting rings leader. And in the meantime, Dr. Bancroft goes back to the Horizon Labs to get whatever materials they need, though when she gets there, Lucian is waiting, and he's acting all calm and nice, like, I'm worried about him, I think he needs me, we need to get him back here, do you know where he is? But she's not giving him anything, she's not giving him a single hint, though he can tell she's lying because of the vampire hearing. Though it does lead to an honestly very threatening line. Hold on, I'm trying to find it. As she talked about here it is. As when Dr. Bancroft found Lucian there, she said, if I'd known you were here, I would have prepared a fancy dinner. And so as Lucian leaves, he says, we'll have to do that dinner another time, Martine. I love it. It's just so subtly threatening yet jovial. And in the meantime, as Lucian continues tarnishing Michael Morbius' name by killing more people, Morbius himself begins continuing to try and find a way to counteract him and Lucian. Because the thing is, he's begun doing the math, and he realizes he can only survive on the artificial blood for at least one more day. After that, if he wants to keep going, he's going to need to drink real blood. And the thing is, from the dosage he got beforehand, from the little packet he got from Lucian, he knows that if he drinks that blood, he'll become feral, he'll become a hunter, and he's afraid he won't be able to control himself. So he's developed a serum that I don't know the whole scientific mumbo jumbo behind it. I wasn't fully paying attention during that scene. But essentially, it will be lethal to people like Morbius and Lucian. And he created 2 doses, one for himself and one for Lucian. Now, Dr. Bancroft thinks it's a bad idea because clearly Morbius has gotten more of a handle of himself, but he thinks it's necessary and he doesn't want to become the same monster that Lucian has. And unfortunately, Lucian just keeps getting worse as the police did continue doing an investigation, and Lucien's latest victims, it turns out, were a bunch of jackasses at a bar, and when he killed them, the CCTV footage from the bar managed to get it on camera, and sure enough, they do see that there is someone else like Morbius out there, and realize that he's not the only one killing people. So that gets onto the news, and unfortunately, Morbius and Lucien's caretaker, whose name is Nicholas, who I haven't really mentioned a lot because he's really not that important. He sees this and confronts Lucien about it, but Lucien is still not willing to listen and even accuses Nicholas of taking Michael's side before, well, mortally wounding him and telling him to give Michael a message for him I forgot what the message was, but bottom line, it's just a warning. In the meantime, after Morbius has gotten the serum all ready and has gotten the serum all ready, he goes out to hunt for Lucien, but Nicholas ends up calling him. As such, he goes to check, and Nicholas tells him he's dying. And so Morbius goes to check on him, and Nicholas tells him that Lucien needs to be stopped. And as Morbius is mourning over Nicholas's body, he begins hearing Lucien. Not in the building, but back at his hideout, because, well, he went to go see Nicholas in Lucien's home, and it turns out that Lucien is there. He's been keeping an eye on Morbius and Bancroft, and unfortunately, he's got Dr. Bancroft in a neck hold, and, well, he's telling her, call to him. And to give her further incentive, he stabs a nail through her throat, which eventually does get her to call Michael. As such, he ends up going into full vampire mode, and using the updrafts, we do get a cool scene of him flying through the city as he tries finding her, and he does hear her heartbeat, but it's getting slower, and as a result, when he gets there, when he gets back to the building that they were using as their hideout, it's clear that she's on death's door. As such, Bancroft tells Michael, don't let this be in vain, and she pulls him in seemingly to give him a kiss, but she ends up biting his lip and drawing blood. And so Michael, in anguish and in anger, as she dies, he finally bites into her neck and drinks her blood. And so as it gives him the boost, there's Lucien on the sidelines saying, there you go, Michael, finally drank the red! And so Michael, in anger, just charges at him, and as a result, they both end up diving off the side of the building and having this mid-air fight scene, which again looks really damn cool, but it's unfortunately things are going in Lucien's favor, and he managed to get a few good licks in, which almost weakens Morbius. And eventually the fight ends up falling down so far that it ends up falling into essentially these rotting catacombs of a subway. And while Michael is still barely holding on, Lucien is just having a ball, thinking this is amazing, that Michael started all this, they should embrace this, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. But thankfully Michael is able to turn the tides, as thing is, earlier in the film we saw him go into his little tank of vampire bats, and because of his altered metabolism, the bats just happily accept him. And when he moved to this new lab, he somehow got those things moved in too. Don't ask me how he did it. Even I don't know. It's just kind of dumb either way. But he's able to call out to them, and using echolocation, they're able to make his way to the subway station, and somehow the horde of vampire bats manages to revitalize him, get him on his feet, and he can somehow control them so that he can smack Lucien around. I don't know how, but I admit it's stupid, but it's fun. But at the end of the day, he managed to knock Lucien aside enough so that he's able to go in and, well, stab him with the poison, which does end up doing its job, as Lucien is just on the ground dying. His bluster just goes away, and he gets all sad and scared, and it's like, no, Michael, you can't kill me, it's me. It's like, do you remember everything, Michael? It's like, yeah, I remember everything. And so Lucien dies there in the subway. As such, the police arrive because they saw all the turmoil that Michael and Lucien were causing, and as they gather around the hole that leads to the catacombs, the film ends with with like the swarm of bats flying out into the city of New York, and in the center of them all is Morbius just flying alongside them, a look with his eyes blood red. So, yeah, that's how the film ends. But since it's a Marvel movie, we got our after credits scenes. So we got one and they're both kind of redundant to each other, but essentially it's the setup. Essentially, this is where we get our tie into the MCU. As for the first after credits scene, it turns that we see a landscape shot of New York, as we see a familiar crack form in the sky. Yep, this is actually around the time when the climax of Spider-Man No Way Home happened. And it's around this time that that Doctor Strange's spell that brought all the characters into the MCU is undone and everyone gets sent back. But it turns out that a few stragglers got brought along. As in the New York penitentiary, we see a light glowing from inside one of the cells, and when the light clears, we see that the cell is a new denizen. Adrian Toomes from Spider-Man Homecoming, who quickly realizes that he's not in the same place he was before, says, I hope the grub is better here. And we then see a news broadcast of him being pulled out as the police are wondering how he wound up in there, how he got there. But of course, but depending on his outfit, they're going to bring him in to see for a hearing that he may potentially that will eventually lead to his release. And as such, we then get to the next after credits scene where we see Michael driving a car into the middle of the desert, as apparently he got some coordinates to meet someone there, and so he goes into the desert, and after he gets out of the car, we see him step up to the edge, just kind of look around, and we see something coming at him as kicking up dust. We see Michael get into a battle stance, getting clearly prepared to fight, and when the thing gets close, we see that it's the Vulture. And based on the voice, yeah, it's still Adrian. Somehow he got all of his tech back. I don't know how. I guess it transported with him. Don't know why, but basically, it's just basically the whole point of the scene is that Adrian has absolutely no idea how he got here. He knows that has something to do with Spider-Man, and while he's still learning the ins and outs of this universe, he did some reading up on Morbius, and he thinks that the two of them could potentially do a team up in the future. Maybe meet up with some other people, actually do some good. And Morbius says he seems intrigued by this proposition, and that's where the film ends. There is no other after credit scene, and I know there isn't. I checked, but yep, that was the movie. And I'm not gonna say that the film is awful, it's horrible. It's not the film is not offending anyone for existing. But for what it is, it's not that great. I'm not going to say that on a second viewing, I can honestly say that it's not as bad as I thought it was when I first saw it. But that doesn't mean that it's good. But before we get to why I didn't like it, I suppose I should probably talk about the elements that I did like. And believe it or not, one of those elements was Michael Morbius. Now, to be fair, I'm not going to talk about Jared Leto himself. The whole point of these vlogs is to base my opinions on the film itself. I've done this before with other films and with other films in the MCU. I even touched on it when I looked at Captain Marvel. Yeah, Brie Larson can be controversial, but I'm just there to judge her performance, and the same goes here. Though I will say this, Jared Leto's kind of an asshole. I heard about the stories of him trying to be a method actor and how he was so into it that he was walking with crutches even when he went to the bathroom, which, yeah, I'm sorry, but that's a dick move, but again, just here to judge his acting. And honestly, he doesn't do that bad. He's not a bad actor in this movie. And it's clear that he is trying to work with what he's been given. And I do think he does an okay job of it. He he actually does seem to get he does get most of the inflections right for Morbius. When he looks weak and frail, he gets it across well. When he wants to be calm and nice, but he wants to be calm and collected and nice, he does get it across well. When he wants to be intimidating, he can actually be honestly intimidating. He does actually give a decent performance in this movie. There are a handful of times here and there where I felt that maybe he underplayed the role a little bit, like when he called the SOS to land. I feel like that was a bit more underplayed than it should have been. But for the most part, he does get all the inflections right. He does actually convince me that he is this character. And so far, and honestly, I think he's an alright choice. If he does come back for any more sequels, I think he'd be okay with it. I just think he would need to tone down the method acting quite a bit. And as for the character of Morbius himself, honestly, he's well written. I think he honestly is one of the few elements of the film that's well written. They do, I was kind of, when I first saw the film, I complained about how they like to give him informed attributes at certain points. That they talk about him being a brilliant scientist, and that he revolutionized the field, and that he's he's honorable, blah 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 blah. But honestly, the film actually showcases these traits rather well. They showcase we see him go get a Nobel Prize, and then it cuts him back at his lab, and apparently when he stood up to get it, he rejected it and insulted the nobility of Sweden, who were giving him the prize. But the scene of him talking about it showcases that just what kind of a person he is, what kind of a doctor he is. That he actually that he genuinely does seem kind and caring and genuinely loving. He's comforting a girl, talking with her, actually treating her as an equal, acting friendly towards her. And we see that while he is that he's willing to take some risks with his experiments, he genuinely does care about his patients and is clearly trying to do it for their benefit. When he tries his first experiment with the vampire DNA on one of the test mice and it fails, you see him kind of slump and talk about how why would he be alive if not to help others, before this girl starts having a stroke, and he immediately goes in and tries helping her. Immediately he forgets about the experiment and just tries to preserve this little girl's life before the rat gets back up all completely fine. Or no, it was a mouse, sorry. And so you do see that showcased, and you do see that scientific mind continue to come through in the movie. When he gets his powers and he begins testing them out, how he does it is honestly very scientific. He's not just testing what he can do, but his limits, what he can take, and how long he can go without needing to drink blood. It actually really is interesting and further showcases what kind of a man he is, that he's willing to take risks, that he's willing to do the unthinkable for the benefit of others, but at the end of the day, there is a good heart in there, and he is genuinely a kind person, even if he can be kind of snarky, which we kind of do see from when he was a kid. As when he first meets when he was a kid, we see him meet the young Lucien, and I mentioned before how he's called Milo in this movie. The reason he calls him Milo is because Lucien was seated next to him. Lucien's bed was next to his, and the former owner of that bed was named Milo, although based on Michael's exposition, apparently there were multiple Milos. He just never bothered to learn any of their names. So, yeah, nice kid, that Morbius. But it's clear that Morbius in the film does kind of have that a high of an attitude. But again, well, okay, we don't really see that one, so I'm going to knock that one off. Never mind. But otherwise, they do showcase that he's willing to take risks and do some crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, he has a good heart and wants to do the right thing for people. And I think they showcase that well. They showcase the anger. They showcase that they integrate it in well. They do showcase his character well throughout the movie, and it's actually a consistently written character that I think is honestly strong and honestly, if he appeared again, I wouldn't be against seeing him. He's honestly really good. And on top of that, when he goes into full vampire mode, it's fucking awesome. Every scene where he goes balls to the walls insane, starts leaping around walls, moving at super speed, tearing things apart. It's honestly so kick ass, especially the effects that they use for when he's moving around. As he leaves like misty after images wherever he runs, and it's always blended with whatever he's wearing. It's so really damn cool to witness. And when he's using his vampire sense, the effects look so cool. Like we see the sonar as it bounces off, and it's just so booming. Especially when I was sitting in a theater, when we heard the booming, you could hear it echo around the theater, which really helped add to the mood of it. And when he's using updrafts, you can see him testing it out. You can see him when he's concentrating, things slow down so he can examine his surroundings better. It's all really damn cool, and that's another thing I kind of liked too in comparison when you compare him to Lucien, because Lucien is like a kid on a sugar rush which makes sense considering how weak he is, but he's just like abusing his power and just having fun with it, whereas Morbius actually tested it out. And so when you see him learning about new abilities, you see him testing them out and trying them out in different situations, and thus gaining more experience, which I think makes sense. The scene in the subway when he decides to use what he learned on the rooftop to his advantage to use the updrafts to escape, it's really creative, and it makes sense because you saw him testing out these abilities beforehand and seeing how they operated. So it's a really damn cool scene, and I think it's really damn cool and fun to watch. And the action scenes throughout are consistent with this, for the most part. On top of that, another thing that I genuinely liked was Lucien. I said this before, Matt Smith was a great choice for this role. He delivers in spades. He really does play it like I describe it in one way. It's like if the 11th Doctor snapped. And that's how he plays it. Like he plays it as subdued, like he plays it like the 11th, like the Doctor, but it's a good way. It's good. It's actually really well done and entertaining to watch. You see him be sarcastic and witty, but calm. You can see, when he gets upset, you can see the visible restraint he's doing to keep himself from freaking out. And when you see him be threatening, oh my god, he can be threatening. I remember, like, there's one scene, like, going back to that scene where I talked about how he killed a guy selling newspapers. What happened was that the guy sells in the newspaper and he reads it and it's saying that Michael Morbius is a murderer. And so the newspaper guy says, "Oh, I knew that guy was nuts. Just look at him." And Lucien's like, "You shouldn't judge by appearances. Take me for example. I may look threatening, but I can surprise you." It's like, "Oh, it's like, you want me to show you?" Before ripping the guy's throat out. It's just so twisted and threatening, and the way Matt Smith just plays it, he's able to showcase just like there's so much sinister bile underneath. It's clear he's holding back a lot of anger, and when his actions throughout the movie honestly make sense. It makes sense why he would want to try the serum even though he knows it's dangerous. It makes sense why he would embrace this while Morbius fights it. It makes sense why he would abuse it and have fun with it, because unfortunately the guy kind of got the shaft. I didn't go into this in the plot summary, but what happened was what set Morbius on his path was that Lucien had almost died one day while they were just kind of talking, and unfortunately there were no staff on standby to help him out. So Morbius went to the machine that was supposed to be transfusing his blood and was able to repair it with a spring and from a pen. Their caretaker Nicholas saw the potential, and opted to send Morbius to a special school in New York where he'd be able to learn, refine this, and potentially make something of himself. And meantime, he would look after Lucien. And while Lucien was obviously happy that Michael was away, after he read the note, it got blown away in the wind, and when he went outside to get it, he ran into some jackass kids who decided to beat on the crippled kid. And Lucien, while trying to be nice, eventually snapped and smacked one of the kids with one of his crutches, and while the other kids started beating him up, Nicholas came up and shooed them off, and unfortunately the kid he knocked out, he just goes, after all the kids are gone, he runs up there and starts beating on him some more. So it's clear there's a lot of anger in there, and Matt Smith in the present day clearly showcases that. A lifetime of pain and suffering, of being alone, of building a fortune from pure luck, because like I said, he got the money from gambling it's clear he wants more. It's clear he wants power. He's desperate for anything. And so when he finally does get it, it's like something was unleashed. Essentially, it made the outside match the inside. He wanted so desperately for power, to feel not weak, and now he's got this. And now that he got infected with a serum that turned Morbius into the vampire, he's more than happy to abuse it. Like he said, he's had death hanging over his head most of his life, so why shouldn't everyone else? He's like I said, he's like a kid in a candy store. And throughout the whole movie, you can see him just reveling and enjoying this. And anytime anybody tries calling him out on that, he just gets angry. Because he enjoys being the monster. He enjoys being the one that preys on others for a change. He's not weak anymore. He's now the predator, and he is not going to give that up, and he will fight back, and he will enjoy it. And that's another reason I loved it. He's not only fun, he can be affably evil, and I loved that. Like I said, Matt Smith played it perfectly, showcasing the torment that Lucien is going through, while also showcasing the anger and seething and just malicious joy that he gets from causing the pain. I love it. Matt Smith plays it perfectly. He was a great choice for Lucien, so I'm gonna give you that. I actually legitimately did like that, so I think that's a plus for the movie. But what holds the movie back, in my opinion? Unfortunately, a variety of factors, one of which is unfortunately pacing. The movie feels very much rushed at times, like it's just trying to get from point A to point B very quickly. I complimented the beginning of the movie. I complimented the movie for showcasing Morbius testing out his powers and so forth, but the scene where we see it unfortunately feels very much rushed, like a montage, like they're just trying to get the key points out of the way so that they can get right to the action and see him using these powers. And as a result, it kind of feels like it's just a drive-by. And it's a similar case, and it's as a result, and which unfortunately happens in the rest of the film as well. In the beginning of the movie, when we see Morbius and Lucien as kids, their friendship is really rushed. We don't really see them connecting as kids. Like, the most we get is seeing them running around and laughing with each other while Morbius narrates over it and they chat a little. But unfortunately, as a result of this, their connection, this deep bond they're supposed to have, it doesn't really feel as deep as the film wants it to be. And as a result, while in the present day you can buy that they're friends, because the first time they interact as adults, it's clear they have a rapport with each other. They start ribbing each other. They actually give some good exposition to one another about their current situations, but it's done cleverly through dialogue as they're just kind of ribbing on each other, obviously just having a good time as old friends should. And that's clearly well established, and there are moments in there throughout as we see Lucien comparing Michael to him, which I do think work, but unfortunately their connection as friends does not feel as deep as the movie wants it to be. I was originally going to say this is an example of show don't tell, as they want to tell us that they have this deep friendship without really showing it. But I think the problem is that they don't show enough. They obviously don't tell us all these attributes, but they don't show them quick enough for us to sink in. And it's unfortunately a similar case of the writing in the rest of the movie. Dr. Martine Bancroft is another example of this. The movie does well in establishing that she and Morbius do have a friendship and a relationship, that they're clearly close, that they clearly care about each other. But nowhere in the movie did I buy that they were actually romantically interested in one another. I could buy that they were close and that if this continued on, romance could come, but when they eventually do get to the romance part, it feels rushed. It feels like it feels like it just appeared. It feels like that's where they were eventually trying to go, but it feels like they skipped a few steps getting there, and as a result, it doesn't really feel as strong as it should, which also unfortunately is the case with Lucien. While they do establish that he and Morbius are friends, because their relationship isn't as well established as it should be, unfortunately, it doesn't feel, the tragedy with their relationship doesn't feel as grand. It just feels like it just feels like hero versus villain. It's kind of like in the first Iron Man when you learned Obadiah Stane was a villain. Yeah, you bought that he and Tony were friends, but him being a villain didn't really feel that surprising, and it didn't really feel that tragic when he turned. And as a result, it's a similar case with Lucian. When you see him get desperate to use the serum, it makes sense why he would want it, but at the same time, when seeing Morbius be like, no, I'm not gonna fight you. We're brothers. We're not gonna. I don't want to hurt you. And Lucian being's like, no, you have to accept this. This is a gift. What you did here, like, it doesn't feel as strong as it should be. Now, to be fair, Lucian's death did hit me a little because in that moment you saw the scared child within, as his last words are, It's like, no, Michael, no, you can't kill me. It's me. Like, you see the scared child in there, and that made me feel a little sad for his death. But the tragedy for Michael Morbius didn't really hit as hard because, again, their relationship wasn't very well established, and as a result, it really does not hit you as hard as it should. And I'm gonna consider that a problem. And again, going back to the pacing thing, because it's so off the wall, revelations and plot developments happen more quickly than they should. And as a result, you don't really get a lot of time to let things settle. It looks like they're just trying to get from point A to point B. Like I said, they rushed Lucian and Michael's relationship when they were kids. They rushed the showing Michael Morbius experimenting on the bats and him experimenting on himself a little. As it goes quickly right to him being the vampire, which admittedly you could kind of see as a positive, especially considering that in Venom you didn't see him actually get suited up until halfway through the movie. But even then, it's the similar case. Lucian becomes a villain rather quickly. We see Morbius ultimately trying to find a solution rather quickly. We see Lucian turn on Nicholas rather quickly, which, yeah, like I said, Nicholas was a pointless character, acting just as the caregiver for Morbius and Lucian, and as a result, he really has no point in the movie. He appears in the beginning when he's there in the beginning, he sends Morbius off, but he barely appears very often. When Lucian eventually kills him, it doesn't really hit that hard because you barely knew the guy. Especially since Lucian is like, oh, there you are, taking his side again. Michael this, Michael that, Michael perfect, blah, blah, blah. Like, when did we see this rivalry? When did Lucian hold this much contempt for Michael or Nicholas? This guy has been with him for most of his life. You'd think he would still be a little bit more grateful. I could buy that Lucian would kill him because he's angry, but really, all this stuff just feels like it's coming out of left field. When did we see Lucian be jealous of Michael? When did we see him be angry that Michael got all these steps in life? When did we see any of that? It's not. We don't. This is a superfluous character, and your arguments are invalid, Doctor. So, yes, and on top of that, certain scenes really do feel like they come out of left field and are unneeded, just there for padding. Going back to the bar scene, that's clearly, I feel like that scene could have been over with just seeing Lucian hunting and killing a group of guys, but as a result, because they showcase the whole bar scene, it ultimately just feels like it's padding out the movie. Seeing Michael Morbius get his new lab, that's more padding, as we see him going to see Dr. Bancroft and, well, them talking. It feels like more padding. Like, this should be more, like, it does offer some more character stuff as we see them interacting in a diner as she wants to get kind of gauge him and learn more about him and his abilities. But I feel like a scene like this should have happened earlier. Like, maybe when he went to the hospital, she woke up briefly and saw him, and they just talked. Like, we could have seen that, like, having them talk, like, there instead of here at the diner. Because here at the diner, it's too little too late, because at this point, Michael is not really in the phase of, I'm testing these abilities out. He's in the phase of, I've got to stop Lucian, I need your help. At this point, it feels like he should be more in a hurry, because he knows Lucian is out there killing people for the sheer fun of it. And yet here he is just talking with her, having coffee, and then going into a counterfeiter ring's hideout and then breaking the hand of their leader, which again was admittedly a cool scene, especially with the way Jared Leto played it, but at the same time, it feels like it could have been better. It feels like that scene was just, it could have been shortened. The same goes for the Lucian scene. That, unfortunately, is kind of a problem. And as a result of this, it feels very much all over the map when it comes to things. It feels rushed in certain areas, while other areas feel like they need more attention. Certain plot elements get more. Certain scenes feel like they don't really add anything to the movie other than just to be there and pad out time, while other scenes feel like they just want to keep getting through them so they can get to the next important thing. And as a result, it leaves you not really building much of a connection with these characters. Morbius you can build a connection with, but it's not as but the people he's with don't feel as deep as they should. When he loses his girlfriend, it doesn't feel as traumatic as it should, because while we are sad to see her go, at the same time it doesn't hit as hard as it should, because they're playing it up like she's the big romantic interest when the romance really did not feel as strong as it should have. Lucian, while acting as a cool villain, did not showcase the tragic nature of having to fight your best friend. It really did not. And again, going back to Nicholas the Caretaker, I did not give a shit when that guy died. He just was there, and when he died, it was like, oh, that sucks. Whatever. It doesn't really work towards the film, to the film's advantage, and as a result, it leaves you wanting. It leaves you wanting. And as a result of this, the film just kind of feels lacking. It feels rushed. It feels emotionally disjointed. It feels like it wants to be something bigger than it actually is and fails, which I don't like. It really does make the film feel lesser, which I hate saying because, like I said, there are aspects of this movie that I legitimately enjoy. Mike Morbius is a well-written and well-defined character. Jared Leto does honestly turn in a decent performance with him. Matt Smith as Lucian was perfect casting, and he's a fun villain. The action scenes are really well done and are fun to watch. And I will admit, I would be interested in seeing more of this version of Morbius, seeing him in future films, seeing him develop. How is he going to keep going now that he's unleashed this vampire side and embraced it? Has he found a way to balance it out? Does he go full villain? Is he just deciding to become an anti-hero like Venom? We don't know. But I'd be interested to see where he went, because I am legitimately interested, especially with those after credits scenes, which like I said, I feel like that you could have just had one of those and not the other. Maybe just shown Adrian Toomes appearing in his cell and then have it cut to black, or maybe having Morbius meet him out in the desert instead, as you see him saying, "I don't know how I got here, but I don't know what's going. But I'm still trying to figure things out." Which I'm just going to ask right now: why isn't he more concerned with getting back to the MCU? Yeah, he was in jail for his crimes, but I remember well, Adrian Toomes had a wife and daughter in the MCU. You think he'd at least want to go back so he can get back to them? So that's kind of weird. But at the same time, I would be interested in seeing where else it goes. But again, the major problem with this movie is that in some ways it feels rushed. Character connections don't feel as deep as they should. We don't get to know these characters as well as we should know them. And as a result, we can barely build an emotional connection to everything. Things feel very rushed. Things feel like they just want to get through them so they can get to the next cool scene. It feels like that they're just trying to do a paint by numbers of superhero origins, that they just got to hit all the key points without really giving any emotional attachment to them. And as a result, it feels lacking. It feels lesser. It feels like that this film really wants to be something more than it is and fails. It fails. So, and which also I'm going to just say this right now because I forgot couldn't think of a place to mention it. The cop characters are annoying. I didn't really care for them. I won't say they're incompetent because they genuinely do seem to be doing their jobs well, as they do pick up on clues and they are able to figure out that Michael Morbius is the one behind these things and are able to actually pay attention and notice little details that do help them figure out more things later on, like when they notice the CCTV footage at the bar and were able to use that to identify Lucian. And on top of that, when they were able to pin down that Morbius was probably tied to this, as all the factors on the ship didn't really add up. Again, it works for the Again, they're not incompetent, but they are annoying. They're like trying to have a buddy cop thing, and like one's serious, one's jokey, and it really does not work. It's kind of annoying. So also dock points for that. But like I said, at best though, there is still stuff in this movie to like. Like I said, Morbius is a good character, honestly well written and well acted. The action scenes are really nice. I enjoyed seeing him testing out his abilities and learning from them. I liked Lucian as the villain because he genuinely was entertaining with Matt Smith there. But in terms of story, it feels rushed in some areas. While some things are developed well, they don't feel as developed as they should be for what the film was trying to go for. Some characters don't really feel like they add anything, by which I mean the caretaker. Some things feel like they move too fast, while others feel like that they were just added there for padding. And as a result of this, it feels lacking. The film feels lesser than it should be, and as a result, I still don't feel like the film is that good. That does not mean that that doesn't mean that it's awful. Like I said, there is the stuff that I think works really well. But at best, I would say the film is just okay. At worst, it feels like a disjointed, jumbled mess that doesn't really know what it fully wants to be, and as a result, just kind of falls apart due to lack of strong cohesion. So, yeah, if you're interested in seeing the movie, I wouldn't tell you not to. Because like I said, there is still enough to enjoy. But if you don't want to see it, I honestly don't think you'd be missing much. I do want to see this version of Morbius come back, because they do succeed in making you invested in his story and where things will go. Especially since, another thing I forgot to mention, his girlfriend, Dr. Bancroft, does come back, as apparently he managed to infect her when he bit her. So I'd be interested in seeing where that went, because they did at least build up enough of a relationship with her so that I did care about her. But at the same time, I feel like that if they want to make a sequel, it needs to feel more structured, it needs to take its time more in certain areas, it needs to be able to build a better emotional connection with these characters. Because what we got here, it almost gets there, but doesn't quite yet. So, again, if you want to see it, go ahead. If you don't, you're not missing much. Okay at best, disjointed mess at worst, so yeah. That's about it. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you didn't, I apologize, but if we do venture back into Sony's side of the MCU, I heard that apparently they're also planning to make a Kraven the Hunter movie. So if that film ever sees the light of day, then I'll see you next time as we look at Kraven the Hunter's origin, as we see the Kraven the Hunter movie. But if not, well, I'll see you next time regardless, because next month we're going back to my regular MCU perspectives as we look at Doctor Strange. So until then, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a good night. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you next week when I start my next vlog series. So till then, I hope you take care. See ya, everyone.